this was another nice medical review article about the effects of cannabis on the heart. And it kind of, in a figure, told us about some of the things that we should be kind of mindful of if someone is smoking cannabis, at least in the short term. And what the research has shown is that if you smoke cannabis, that it can cause some potentially hazardous effects on the heart and the vascular system. Number one is that smoke and larger amounts of THC can place some stress. It's called oxidation or inflammation of the body. It makes the body angry in a way. It stresses out the heart. It stresses out the blood vessels. That can lead to inflammation, blood sticking together, the sympathetic nervous system getting activated. Remember sympathetic nervous system? Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you get ready to fight something. So if somebody comes in, then I'm going to expect them to be a little bit jazzed up if they just had some smoke. And it can also lead to some changes in the heart rate and rhythm. Okay? And if I actually ask you that question cold, I went and smoked this mystery substance and I'm coming to see you, what might I look like? And the answer might be, I might be kind of jazzed up like this. And that's kind of the answer. So we have to be mindful of that. There's not a lot of medical literature to look at, but there is a little bit. And you have to go far back. So as Rob said, because this substance was illegal and still is in most of the United States, that there's only a few small studies because it's hard to do medical research with illegal substances. But in 1991, somebody did this interesting study where they got 13 young guys, paid them to smoke a joint, and then they watched what happened to them. Over a period of 30 minutes, they could actually measure the amount of THC. And you can see that the THC level spikes really high shortly after smoking a cigarette. It gets into the body really, really quickly. And when the THC is really, really high, the red line shows heart rate that spikes up, and the green line shows effects on the brain or measures of intoxication. So those things go up really, really rapidly, and then it takes a couple of hours for this to come back down. All right, so if someone comes in to the hospital or your clinic or dinner and they said, I just smoked a joint, then these are some of the things that we need to be mindful of. This doesn't sound so bad, does it? But what if we extend this out? What if you actually lived with heart disease? And here was an interesting study that was actually published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prominent medical journal that we have. This was from 1974, so pretty old. And they found 10 people with angina. And they were also asked to smoke marijuana cigarette or a placebo cigarette. And they watched what happened to them over the next hour. And not surprisingly, heart rate goes up, and the stress on the heart, as measured by heart rate and blood pressure, went up. If you actually measured carbon monoxide in the bloodstream, it went up because you're smoking things, which is not a good thing. And if you looked at stress on the heart, it went up as well, which is not a good thing. If you measured the amount of oxygen that was being delivered to the heart, it went down, and it reduced the time before this person experienced angina by about half. This to say that there's probably a reason that we can stress out the heart by smoking cigarettes and smoking marijuana as well. Okay? In another larger study where they looked at people who had actually experienced a heart attack, about 4,000 people, they asked, did you, in your background, smoke marijuana? And particularly, did you smoke it in close proximity to your heart attack? So people who admitted to smoking marijuana more than once a week, their risk of dying from their heart disease was about 4 times higher than non-marijuana smokers. And if you had it within 1 hour, if you had your heart attack, or if you smoked your marijuana cigarette within the hour, your risk of your heart attack was significantly higher as well. So there seems to at least be an association between bad things happening to your heart and smoking things, including marijuana. In this larger study from the United States, where they looked at 200,000 cannabis, quote, abusers versus 10 million non-cannabis users, they found another interesting relationship. In the green bars are the risk of having a heart attack if you're a cannabis user. In the blue bars are the risk of having a heart attack if you're not a cannabis user. This is the age categories broken into 5 years. So if you follow the blue line, first of all, what do you notice? As we get older, the risk of heart attack goes up. Unfortunately, age is our biggest factor that drives the risk of heart attacks. But interestingly, in the green lines, you'll see that it kind of goes up and then goes down again. And the green bars, whenever the green bar is higher than a blue bar, that means the cannabis users have some extra risk associated with them. The green bars are higher than the blue bars at all age groups until we reach about 65, when age takes over. And for the young people in particular, so 30-year-olds have no business having heart attacks, I'm afraid, unless you're really unlucky for some reason. But in this case, the 30-year-olds had a 4-time higher risk of having a heart attack if they were a cannabis user. All right, so it makes us concerned about something going on here. And not only that, it leads to story number 2 of the 35-year-old guy who goes into the emergency department with terrible chest pain after smoking a joint. They do the electrocardiogram that all of you are familiar with, and what they find is, well, Rob will recognize this, and Leslie and Denise, that, boy, this cardiogram is very, very abnormal. If you see this, all the alarm bells go off, that there's a heart attack happening right in front of our eyes. And indeed, that's what they thought. So immediately the cardiology group comes down, and they took an ultrasound picture of his heart at the same time, just to see, because they couldn't believe this 35-year-old guy was having this major heart catastrophe going on. What they found with his heart was this, which is very, very unusual. So let me introduce you to one little bit of Japanese. Takutsubo. What does takutsubo mean, anybody? Takutsubo literally translates to octopus trap. And why do they say takutsubo? Because the shape of this heart, normally this is lovely, streamlined like a cone. That's the way the heart is shaped, and it beats like a cone. Expands and contracts. This, you see, is shaped like a vase or a pot. And in Japan, they put these pots in the ocean. Octopi will climb into them, and they won't come back out. So you pull up the pot, and you got yourself an octopus. Happy dinner. The heart is not meant to look like an octopus pot. It's meant to look like a nice, lean, mean cone. The odd thing about this stress cardiomyopathy, it's recognized as a syndrome. Another name for this in North America is, because we don't like Takotsubo syndrome, we call this broken heart syndrome. And it happens characteristically in middle to older age women. Nope, don't want to be pejorative here. But middle-aged women under terrible stress may end up in the emergency department with what looks like a heart attack, and this is the condition that they might have. What's interesting is that in the last few years, that there are a number of younger men coming to hospital with this syndrome called Takotsubo, or broken heart. And it relates to what? Smoking cannabis. Interesting. It wasn't there before, but now this thing is going on. So we got this kind of cascade of something going on in cannabis users, particularly the young who are using this more, don't have other heart risk factors, but they're coming up with these kinds of issues. Not only that, they might see this, and this would be another rhythm that would really get Rob excited. If anybody saw this thing, so you see this kind of waveform on an electrocardiogram, you see it's wide, it's scary, it looks like a sawtooth kind of thing. This is called ventricular tachycardia. This is the heart in real distress. We don't ever want to see this, but again, in the emergency department, they've seen young men in particular coming to the hospital with this. Sometimes this happens in people with inherited conditions, abnormalities. Typically it happens in older people who have had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different heart attacks in the past. So this is something that's going on. in this particular case, they could show that this rhythm, they could bring it on as long as there was cannabis or THC floating in the system. Interesting. So those are my stories of younger people. What might happen in the future? 75-year-old man actually relayed this story. He was had his heart attack about 6 months ago. He was admitted to the hospital up in cottage country because he was totally confused. His family had sent him there. His heart was racing. And is this cannabis related? Well, other people get confused and other people get racing heart. The only thing he said on questioning was he had this chocolate bar. But he had this chocolate bar because it was sitting in the fridge. And the only odd thing was that his son or grandson was at the cottage the weekend before and left him a gift of a chocolate bar in the fridge. Now, if you're eating a Kit Kat bar, can you ever stop at one? One stick? No? 1, 2, 3, 4, especially if it's a nice chocolate, right? And the thing with edibles, of course, is that you don't feel this. The concern about edibles that will be coming to the market, and these are products that are available in Colorado right now, right? Colorado has had legalized cannabis for many years now, is that you'll see that deliberately people packaging edible cannabis products, for some reason, will make products that are called things like Keef Cats and Oreos, not Oreos, or Butterfingers instead of Butterfingers. So there's some deliberate play on creating edibles that actually look, for all intents and purposes, like the things that we eat. And the thing with edibles is, because you're not inhaling it, hitting your brain, is that you can eat one and you have no effect except that it tastes like chocolate. And you can never stop at one. So by the time you've eaten 4 sticks, you still don't have an effect. But 2 hours later is when this stuff kicks in. And you become confused and your heart starts to race. So we saw this curve before. If you smoke THC, that you get your peak very, very rapidly. With edibles, the peak doesn't come for 3 hours later, when you might get it hit all at once. So we need to be mindful and thoughtful about this. And the emergency folks from Colorado have just published this study last month where they talked about people coming to the emergency department with cannabis-related events. They show that over a 5-year period, that the number of visits to the emergency department have been going up steadily. Most people choose to smoke their cannabis in Colorado, and it's probably going to be true in Canada as well, just because that's the way that it's used. So there's going to be more events with inhaled, but you can see that the number of events with edible products also goes up. And the interesting thing is that for things like heart conditions, it's actually more likely that you'll land in the hospital after having eaten something than smoking something. Because if you smoke something, you get a pretty rapid feedback to say, don't have any more of this stuff before your heart kicks in. With edibles, you just may choose to eat more and more until it's too late. So actually, if you have two brownies, it doubles the risk of intoxication, psychiatric symptoms, and these heart kinds of things going on. All right? So be mindful, be cautious, counsel your friends. In October, when all these edibles become available, this is the world that we're going to face. And of course, they're available now. I'm sure somebody could find them. This nice cartoon kind of highlights all of the different things that have been observed in the medical literature. We've talked about a few of them, including that octopus trap, that Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. At the bottom, those cases of heart attacks and chest pain and angina that might happen. But there's other things that might also occur, including those rhythm disturbances. So, is it safe for the heart? Probably largely okay. But there are some people that will get into trouble. We need to be really aware of this sort of stuff before this gets more widely distributed. Finally, story number 4. Okay? Time out, when someone asks me what's the best pot for me, you might say, I'm very learned. I've read a great deal. I can tell you the answer. Well, I'd like you to pick a nice kush because that's kind of relaxing for you. And try to have more CBD in it, will you? Don't want that THC to mess up your head. Keep it nice and calm, right? Does that sound good to you? Start with a low dose. I don't want you to have that high dose stuff. Oh, well, don't smoke things because smoking is a bad thing. So have some oil. Just have some CBD oil, okay? That's going to be good for you. You with me? Is that the whole story, though? Because maybe there's more to this story. Maybe there's more to this story. So if I told you this kind of story, and some of us are living with heart conditions, and diabetes, and high blood pressure, and stress, and we might be on all of these standard kinds of medications. Denise, have you seen people on this smattering of medicines? This sounds pretty common, right? This would be a common kind of scenario. So let me share maybe some other thoughts about what this interaction might entail. So number one, if my grandmother asked me what's the best pot for me, I'd say, Granny, number one is this ain't the same pot. What you grew up with in the 60s or 70s is not the same pot, right? And you've probably heard this in the news on different occasions, that in the 1960s and 70s, the pot that was around had about 2% THC. Increasingly over a couple of decades, we now have the pot concentrations go up to 20%. On the Ontario Cannabis store, you can order products that are 20% plus. And then, being the creative chemists that they are, interesting drug aficionados will offer you a product that's 30, 40, 50, even 90% THC. People are dying of THC overdose. You can actually do that. So it's not the same pot. That's number one. Number two, I ask you this question. Oh, you should be horrified. You should all be gasping. Oh, in horror, in terror. What has he shown me? I've shown you the grapefruit. Now, why do I show you the grapefruit vis-a-vis the medicine cocktail? Anybody? Has anybody counseled you that the grapefruit might be dangerous or even deadly to you? So if you are scared of the grapefruit, you should also be scared of the pot. Why? What's the deal with grapefruit? Anybody know? Increases the intensity of the statin is one kind of answer. Absolutely. So what's the deal with grapefruit? So drug metabolism 101 is that if we ingest a medication, it gets chewed up in your mouth or your stomach, ground up, gets picked up by the blood circulation, gets taken to the liver. And the liver's job is to transform that medicine into a form where it can actually have its effect and then get out of the body. Otherwise, all the medicines will just build up inside of you. The interesting thing that happens along the way is that many drugs will go through some kind of change. So it's stylized here as the pink medicine gets transformed by this factory that's called P450. And it's changed into a form that's here green or green and purple that can actually be eliminated through the kidneys. Are you with me on this? That's the liver's function vis-a-vis medications. So remember this P450, that's the major factory. Why do we care? Because grapefruit has in it a substance, 3,6-dihydroxybergamotrin. That's way more detail than you ever wanted. But I could just put a big grapefruit right here, and it would block that pathway. Which means that the drug just builds up in your system, like the statin drug, like the calcium channel blocker drug. All right? That's one of them. P450 as the central thing. And this is the thing to keep in mind. Anyone recognize this? What the heck is he telling? This is in Brussels. This is the mannequin piece, yes? This is, and some of us know this too well, for the drugs that you are taking. This may be you every morning, right? But this is the body's function, right? If we ingest a medication, you're supposed to pee it out. But there are some substances that don't necessarily make us stop peeing, but it stops us peeing the drugs out. And that's what grapefruit is. That is also what CBD is. So I might have given you the nice answer, the learned answer about cannabis, and I'd say choose the CBD oil because that's nice and friendly for you. But CBD that is not well known by anybody except a few Japanese labs. CBD is a very potent inhibitor of CYP3A4, which is the same thing that grapefruits do. They block calcium channel blockers. They block some statins. But they, as a bonus, they also block another important pathway called 2D6, which metabolizes drugs that we take for depression, drugs that we might treat schizophrenia, beta blocker drugs, as well as opioid drugs like codeine. So, if I show you back this medicine profile, which looked very thoughtful, which was evidence-based, this is the best drugs that I have for you, but if I innocently say, take some CBD, because that's good for your pain, what I have inadvertently done potentially is messed up every single drug on this board. I have increased the amount of metoprolol that will be in your bloodstream. That'll slow your heart rate. I've increased the amount of amlodipine in your system that will drop your blood pressure. I have maybe tenfold increased the amount of statin in your system that will cause you all kinds of muscle aches. I've doubled the amount of amitriptyline, and we know if you take too much amitriptyline, that actually leads to very dangerous heart rhythms. And by the way, the codeine that you were taking for your pain, it actually doesn't work anymore, because I've blocked the body's ability to transform that stuff into something that actually works. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So who the heck has told you about this before? Go to the Ontario Cannabis store and see. It doesn't ask you if you're taking medications. It doesn't ask you for any of these sorts of things. But now you know, right? So one of the answers about taking anything, including this plant called cannabis, who should you talk to? Don't talk to me. Who should you talk to? You should talk to your doctor, talk to your pharmacist, right? It's okay to have the conversation. In fact, it's really good to have the conversation. There are good reasons to be using some of these products, but we just need to be really thoughtful about it and just be aware. Is this okay for my heart? Is this going to interact with anything that's going on? Is it going to cause more chest pain? Is it going to cause a weird electrical rhythm in my system? So cannabis use is growing. It's going to go. It's going to keep taking off. It's going to be a very interesting society that we're in. Remember that THC is the stuff that's active on our brain. CBD may be the balancing stuff. And the amount of one to the other is really, really important in terms of the balance. Be careful, because we can get a lot of THC, just like we don't reach for a vodka first thing in the morning. Or maybe you do, I don't know. I'm not judging. But that may not be the best thing that you want to do. And for the most part, most of the cannabis, the experienced cannabis prescribers would recommend, if you're seeing them for some condition, then they're probably going to be recommending a CBD dominant product. But you've now got some extra information. If you're taking a long list of other medicines, just be thoughtful about those kinds of things. There are many reasons why people are using cannabis products. Be thoughtful about that. Don't smoke it if you can't. If at all possible, don't smoke it. But on the other hand, if you're taking edibles, just be careful about that, right? Don't overdose yourself, because it's easy to overdose on that sort of stuff. When it comes to the heart, I think what I've told you is there's really not any evidence of benefit for the heart. There isn't anything good about THC and the heart. There isn't anything good about CBD and the heart. So you're not taking it for your heart per se. You may be taking it for other reasons, and your heart has to be okay with that. And you need to be okay with that. There's going to be a lot of research, and I think this is an interesting area for us. I'll stop there, and I'll take some questions on the record and then off the record.